What is going on, Mushroom Family? Welcome to another episode of the Mushroom Revival podcast. We are unbelievably obsessed with the healing power of mushrooms, and we are bridging the gap between you, our amazing, incredible listeners, and the wonderful, wacky world of mushrooms and fungi. We bring on experts and guests from all around the world to geek out with us and go on a mushroom journey deep into the depths of mycology and mushrooms. So we are super excited for everyone tuning in and shrooming in with us. Let's jump in.
Today we have the well-known mushroom guru, Larry Evans, who was the star of Know Your Mushrooms. And we are so excited to have you on, Larry. It's been long overdue. There's the cover of Know Your Mushrooms. That's Larry Evans, rocking the braids then and now. Welcome.
Greetings. Good to see you.
We always start off with asking our guests what brought them into the world of mushrooms and how you decided to dedicate your whole life to fungal things.
Really? People have questions like that? I can't believe that.
Yeah.
Crazy. Who can remember that far back? Come on now. That's like shrouded in mystery. That's like, when the clouds began, things like that. I don't know. It's just like, when did I first pick up on mushrooms? Well, I was walking through the Christmas tree farm one day, and I slipped on a slippery jack. And, that was the Satori. That was the Zen moment that, opened the door. So.
Slip and slide.
If you were to embody one mushroom, what mushroom do you think that would be?
I prefer to identify as a fungus and not as a mushroom.
There you go.
So, yeah.
Do you have a fungus that you would identify with? Or is it just all fungi?
I'd like to be trichoderma, but I'm probably...
Oh, no.
The resilient, most hated... No, I'm kidding.
The dreaded trichoderma.
Only for mushroom farmers.
The fungal boogeyman.
Yeah. We are your worst dream. Not trichoderma. Yeah,
but trich is great for soil, right?
Where would we be without trichoderma? Did you know that what we call the trichoderma is just the imperfect half of a perfect organism, and that the other half, if you will, the other half of the trichoderma identity lives inside of a termite nest and is sexually inhibited and fed upon by termites. Everybody eats trichoderma. You've probably eaten your weight in trichoderma during your lifetime. Maybe a couple times, Trichoderma, it's everywhere. And yeah, it's the bane of cultivators, but it's actually a very misunderstood and sexually frustrated fungus because, I don't know, at some point we have to get in as fungal sex, and it's really a mess because fungal sex is a lot more complicated than the normal mammal binary type sexuality, because they have reproductive spores that are basically clones of themselves, and we recognize this as a whole generation, and all kinds of fungi go through this, but it's not a mushroom, right? And that's really a frustrating kind of thing to sort of explain to people, that mushroom sexuality is not the simple binary type of thing that we expect from mammals. It's more like, it's a mix of different gametes operating in a much more open system, I guess you would say. So trichoderma, using all these analogies that I just set out for myself, trichoderma, the male or the positive member of this pair, is everywhere, and it is constantly reproducing itself and showing up in your culture dishes and making its vegetative self all over the place. The counterpart lives inside of a termite nest in Africa and never sees the light of day until the termite nest dies. at what point it finally gets connected with the outside air. And at that point, voila, it's got its happy little Trichoderma mating pair waiting for it. Isn't that sweet? Kind of like
That
the
is
Romeo
sweet.
and Juliet of the mushroom world.
And I've heard fungi can hold up to 70% of the carbon in soils, and it depends on the ecosystems in which they're interacting with. But is there something fungi are doing in the soils that other organisms are not when they're interacting with carbon?
Really cool point, a really cool point. And it has to do with the kinds of fungi that we're looking at. And that is that in our northern temperate ecosystems, the mycorrhizal fungi that make mushrooms that we're familiar with, from amanitas and boletes to chanterelles, these mycorrhizal mushrooms are so efficient at taking nutrients out of this organic layer, the soil layer, that it's almost pure carbon. There's nothing left. Whereas when you get in the tropics, things are a little messier, right? You've got a lot more bacterial action. You've got a lot more breakdown products. And you don't have this nice isolation of all the nutrients that happens when you have a vacuum cleaner like mycorrhizal fungi at work. And as a result, we pile up a lot more soil carbon up at the northern temperate areas than you do at the tropics, which is kind of counterintuitive. But it also decomposes faster. And that's because the wood becomes BCR, brown cuboidal rot. And we're kind of approaching this topic from the side. But I believe you guys have discussed on your program before the different kinds of white and brown rot fungi, and that, I guess our more primitive fungi are the brown rot fungi. And well, there's a whole story about how soil carbon happens. And this is a soil carbon interview that I gave with Rayleigh Nerisi. It goes on for about an hour, and I don't want to get into it too deep, but I did want to, in talking about soil carbon, I think it's very important to realize that the soil holds at least or more carbon than the atmosphere, and that this is one of the key ways that we can combat climate change, at least in the form of carbon dioxide accumulation in the atmosphere, is by utilizing these intermediate steps more efficiently. What we're looking at here is how to basically sequester carbon in your soil and agricultural operations, and at the same time produce different products, making, for example, mushrooms, building materials, filters, all manner of things that we can grow from this substrate. One example here is we do with anaerobic fermentation. We take very simple processes, and this allows us to expand the mushroom grow really effectively. All I'm doing here in this picture is taking this big plastic barrel, and it's full of wood chips. It's full of water. That water, we put a few rocks on top of that to hold the wood chips underwater for somewhere between a week and 2 weeks, depending on the weather conditions. You can even do it in the wintertime, as you can see. And at that time, now I've actually gone through this and taken microscopic analysis, and you can actually see the change in the microbial communities over the 4 or 5 days. But by the end of the week, you have changed your community. There is no oxygen left in that area, and you have nothing in there but anaerobic bacteria. At that point, we drain it, and you basically have a sterile media that we can then put mushrooms onto. And so we can utilize large amounts of landscape type waste, wood chips, things like this. Another step in this process is using these fungi, in this case, oyster mushrooms, to break down toxic waste. Here's a project that we have going in Missoula right now. This is we're using oyster mushroom spawn to break down particle board waste. All right, particle board contains urea formaldehyde, which is a rosin that holds the sawdust together into a particle board. And this stuff is toxic. If it soaks into the waterways, it becomes formalin, and that's a carcinogen. We don't like that. So instead, we can take this particle board, soak it in water, and then soak it in water. We just soak the particle board in water, and then as you can see in this pile, it's put together with the oyster mushrooms, and it actually grows. You can see it actively growing in this picture on the left. You can see it's actively growing on the particle board, and in the larger picture, you can see it's actually fruiting out from amongst the particle board here. And so this digests the urea formaldehyde. The oyster mushroom has peroxidase enzymes that allow it to burn that formaldehyde off and get a hold of the valuable urea, the valuable nitrogen that is in this rosin. And we're left with a compost that is high in nitrogen and non-toxic. So there's a couple of the things that we can look at this in terms of using fungi. Again, not so much mushrooms. This is more the mycelial end of the fungal thing. And here we have a little more backup for this subject. The soil carbon interviews with Ray Lenarisi here at anchor.fm, and Dr. Rick Freeman, who has done a lot with the soils aspect of this stuff.
And I think it's super interesting that you brought up how tropical regions don't have that much carbon in the soil. And that's super counterintuitive. I remember I went to Ecuador in 2015, I think at this point, and was studying different, biodiversity and different ecosystems. And we asked, our teacher and a lot of locals who read a bunch of papers, and that was the case. It's this super thin layer of topsoil, this rich organic matter, but it's very, very negligible. And when the conquistadors came, to Ecuador and other places, they clear-cutted a lot of regions thinking, wow, this place is so biodiverse. It's so rich. It's so abundant. We can grow unlimited crops here. And they went to grow the crops and they didn't do that well. And they're like, what is happening? And they had maybe one good crop, and these pests came in, and they weren't as nutrient dense as they originally were hoping. And that's because the soil is really thin, because it's, there's so many plants just recycling this carbon and other nutrients really, really, really quickly. And you have a lot of experience in, tropical regions, especially Bolivia. I think when we were in Telluride earlier this summer, you're telling me that I think you were invited to Bolivia your first time. Is that right?
Yeah, I started going to Bolivia in 2005. I got an invite from the fellow who was then the curator of the Bolivian National Herbarium to do some collecting down there in the Madidi protected area. And I showed up that year and every year for about 14 years. And we put about between 1,500 and 1,800 specimens on file with the Bolivian National Herbarium. Tatiana worked with Dr. Tatiana San Juan.
Oh, nice.
and we cataloged about 120 or 30 species of cordyceps there that had never been recorded in Bolivia. When I first started going down there in the early part of the 2005 and whatnot, there really wasn't a whole lot of interest or awareness of cordyceps in that area. And now, and of course I had to explain what cordyceps was, right? When I was in China, I've got my first cordyceps was, I'm walking down the street in Tibet and there's some guy over there going, psst, psst, come here, and he like brings me up these things and goes, check it out. And he's selling me the Cordyceps sinensis. He's selling me the Yartsagumba, the winter worm summergrass. And I thought this guy's selling me a pepper. And I pick it up and I look at it and I'm going, this ain't a pepper. It's got legs on it. This guy's selling me a worm here. And it's got something sticking out of it, So I said, well, what is it? I go, my great Tibetan language. I go, what? And he goes, what? I go, then he goes like, okay. And then he goes, I go, okay, give me 2. And so that was my first experience with cordyceps. And I think a lot of people's first heard of cordyceps was back in the 80s when every Chinese person in the world thought it was the greatest thing. But I don't think there were 3 Europeans that had ever heard of this stuff. So it was pretty crazy.
Wow.
Now I say cordyceps and people go, do you mean Metarrhiza or Ophiocordyceps or,
Yeah.
So it's like the level of discussion has changed considerably from it's a mushroom that eats bugs to, we're talking entomopathogens with medicinal and neuropathological capacities. So,
and it's still going. There's a wide audience that's still, unfortunately, there's a video game called The Last of Us that was, the whole premise was about cordyceps affecting humans, and it was this apocalyptic thing. And so when we post about the cordyceps that we grow, we get all these comments about The Last of Us and, oh, you trying to infect the human race and all this stuff. It's really funny. And so that like brought down the global consciousness a little bit, but we're bringing it back up. There's so many amazing mycologists studying entomopathogenic fungi. And that's awesome. Tatiana is great. I would love to meet her. I almost met her in Colombia a couple years ago, but it was the dry season. And she said, not even worth it. Like, just stay inside. Enjoy the nature, but you're not going to find a single mushroom, which I didn't, unfortunately. We'll have to go back.
These things happen. Yeah, it's pretty seasonal down there. So, but yeah, there's a lot, spent a lot of time in Bolivia. We've got a lot of footage there that I've shared with you. Feel free to run through any of that type of stuff, but you see us finding cordyceps in a lot of this footage. And that is, again, something that's kind of highly seasonal, but the diversity and amount of cordyceps was completely unsuspected, I think, when we first went down there. And as Tatiana has found out, the presence of cordyceps, especially the sexual form of the fruiting bodies, is much more prevalent in primary rather than secondary rainforest. There's certain species like the Leukogaster that is more common in a secondary forest, but most of your insect-eating fungi tend to fruit more prolifically in primary rainforest. So
cool. And we were just talking about collecting seasons and what seasons are good. Is it right that there's 14 collecting seasons in Bolivia?
I've spent 14 collecting seasons in Bolivia. Yeah.
Oh, got
years.
it. Got it.
Yeah. And I have kind of tried to intersperse this from pretty much the winter solstice as we know it through to the spring equinox, and try to, overlap different aspects of the season. Sometimes I'm early for the season. Sometimes I'm late for the season. There's no way to, any type of mushroom study is a scattershot approach. But I feel that one of the real challenges in any sort of ecological study is continuity. So much ecological information is deduced or extrapolated from snapshots and from single data points, and the importance of finding multiple data points over long periods of time is really essential for showing the relative importance or frequency of different individuals in an ecosystem. So,
is this something that you or Tatiana or anyone involved is working to do? Have more comprehensive data collection and reportage?
We're so far behind the curve, we're around the bend. I mean, as a species, the two-leggeds we're really not even in the, we ain't got it. We haven't got it figured out yet.
One of my dreams is to convert like a Sprinter van or something and hang around tropical rainforest, just collecting different cordyceps species, and just spending months and months straight just going out. I think it's the funnest mushroom to find. They're like little, for me, you just have to look in the most interesting spaces. Truffles are also really fun to find.
Very addictive kind of mushroom to hunt. Once you start looking for those, you can't really eat them that well. Hard to make.
No, but and they look crazy. I mean, just mushrooms popping out of the head or the back or whatever of an insect. And insects, they're so biodiverse and all these different colors and shapes, and even just finding cool insects is cool enough. But then the weird mushrooms growing out of them in weird places, like underneath a leaf, they're really hard to find. And so it's kind of like a treasure hunt.
It's a shroom eat bug world out there, man. I tell you.
Do you have a favorite specimen that you found?
Whenever we're looking at contaminated soils and remediating stuff, people go, well, what happens when the mushroom grows up? Is it going to be poisonous to eat? What is going to happen to this fungus that eats all this contaminated, all this petroleum and stuff? It's like, same thing that happens to all the mushrooms. It's going to get eaten by a bug.
Right.
Why should it be any different? 90% of all that stuff goes in the belly of a bug, and 10% of it can grow its way back out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite specimen that you found in Bolivia over the 14 different collecting seasons?
Every year,
or mushroom or fungus in general?
Every year we have a new bunch of different stuff. My last one was we found a praying mantis egg case.
Whoa!
With
wow,
20 or 30 little tiny cordyceps coming out of each little cell, and it was it's in the herbarium. I don't think there's a species on it, but yeah, it's always neat to find, and the thing is, it's not necessarily that we're finding new material. It's that we've found someone who realizes that it's new material. Right. I think that so many times we mistake a lack of presence we mistake a lack of reportage for a lack of presence. And
you actually co-wrote the field guide, a field guide to tropical Amazon mushrooms with Daniel Winkler.
That one?
Which I love. It's an amazing. I mean, the pictures are awesome, and Daniel Winkler's one of the greatest humans. What brought on this guide? Was there not much information out there about tropical mushrooms, or do you just want to add to the wealth of information that was already there?
No, there's very little. When I started out down there, the only thing that we had to go by was the first guide of mushrooms to Costa Rica, and then Horvath's book on Patagonian fungi. Those are the only two popular editions, and everything else was, wading through the literature and things like that. So yeah, we put this together because we wanted to try and I guess catalog the most commonly encountered species down there, because there is such a huge variety of species in the Amazon. We just picked up the ones that were pretty much hard to miss. The biggest edibles, the most common, like the little kind of the jungle wildflower here, the cocaina, basic Acaria that's growing on an insect, and these sorts of things. I would say that we describe about 80 species here, to the point where you could reasonably expect to know that you've got the right thing. And that's maybe 1%, not even 1% of the species that we've come across over there. So, it's a start, but you need to know what is common before you can sit there and say, we found something new. Everybody says, oh, I found something new. It's like, oh, what's that? Oh, we call that a puffball. Good find. Yeah. So yeah, it's important to know what you got. And, that doesn't always happen overnight. And that's why I think it's very encouraging to me, since I've been in the, playing this mushroom game for a while. It's really encouraging to me to see the dramatic expansion in numbers of people that are becoming more aware of mushrooms as a resource. And I really feel that in the next 20 years, this frontier is that what we're looking at is this frontier of mushroom understanding is going to be manifested, if you will, by people exploring the trophic levels, all the different levels, the trophic levels that we can pull out of a piece of wood. Right now, you think of taking a piece of wood and burning it, and that all that wood goes into CO2 and water. And instead, we can break that down into 4 different processes. We can grow oyster mushrooms on it. We can take that oyster mushroom stuff and we can grow soldier fly larvae on it. We can take that byproduct and grow agaricus on it. We can take that final product and mix it with other composts and make it turn it into a grow medium, a horticultural mix. Okay, so there we've gotten, instead of just one foosh and a little bit of heat, we have 4 different products: protein, oils, nutrients, etc. And this is where what we call the waste stream, this is where our frontier is. This is where the next great discoveries are going to be made, the real economic realizations, because we have to close that cycle. Otherwise, we're going to be just the same situation we had 260 million years ago, when we're up to our neck in lignin, because nothing can eat lignin.
Thank you, white rot fungi.
Whee!
And brown rot and all the other rotters.
Yeah, so we did that quite a bit with the Rayleigh Nerisi interview and the history of coal and all the work that Hibbett and all those folks have done to show the remarkable story of how fungi have shaped our soil and atmosphere conditions.
Thank you for sharing that. And for anyone who's interested, that will be in the show notes for sure. Yeah, this is a beautiful thing about fungal knowledge, and I really hope that it starts being taken more seriously within the industry.
Yeah, here for example, a French outfit is growing just investing $13 million to grow soldier fly larvae on the agricultural waste of Archer Daniels Midland, which is, basically making corn syrup, right? Your high fructose corn syrup and your soybean meal and all this kind of stuff. The blow-by from that is going to be feeding soldier fly larvae to the tune of they're talking, they're measuring it in tons. It's a commodity.
That is such good news. We have a sort of inadvertent soldier fly farm going on in our backyard. We have a compost bin, and one day, suddenly, there were all these larvae. We were like, oh my gosh, what are these? Gross, And then the more we dug into it, we found out they were soldier fly larvae. And we were so thankful for this. They're actually really good-looking flies, in my opinion.
Handsome.
They really are. I think they're a nice bug.
The grubs are grubs,
But after that, they don't eat anything. They just go to mate and then they die. So
I don't think they have mouth parts.
The nice thing is that they harvest themselves. That the soldier fly larva will consume about 5 pounds of garbage and turn that 5 pounds of garbage into 1 pound of soldier fly larva within a 24-hour period. And the nice thing is that the soldier flies, their instinct is to climb up to the highest point possible to molt. And so they just climb right into the vacuum and they go right on the conveyor belt and thank you very much. It's because we can control it. We like to make money on things, so that's what we want to do. We're not doing this because we like soldier flies. We're doing this because soldier flies make money out of stuff that's not money. And that's what we're doing. I showed you with the urea formaldehyde, with the waste product. I think this is the frontier. This is being able to find new sources of substrate for fungi from existing waste streams. There's no reason you should be paying for substrate these days. Maybe we'll live in the future where substrate is traded on the commodities market like it probably should be. But at this point, man, you can have pretty much any type of fungal substrate for the cost of having them deliver it even to your house. I mean, if you need,
it's literally dirt cheap.
Call up your power company and say, dude, next time you got a load of chips, here's my address, and you
Chip drop.
Better tell them to stop coming. That's all I can say.
Right. Yeah. Chip drop is a really good, I think it's just chipdrop.com. And you can just sign up. They won't tell you when they're going to drop it off, or you can ask for species of wood, like all hardwood or something like that, but good luck. And I actually was renting out a house for a while and I signed up for chip drop and I said all hardwood or mostly hardwood, over 50%. Just make sure it's over 50%. And they said, hey, because it's so specific, and it has to be a local tree job in that area. And if somebody else is closer and they have a chip drop, then we'll deliver to them. So it's 6 months to a year later, I move out of the house. I'm like, okay, never going to get the chip drop. I drive by my old house 2 weeks later, and there's this humongous mountain of chips just blocking the entire driveway. They did not find a good spot for it. They just dropped it off right in the driveway. And
this is the place.
Oh no.
Here it is. And I bet the people who were renting the house that moved in after me were so confused. They're like, why is there a mountain of chips? But it's a great app, and if you're in a location for a while, just sign up, and one day you'll be surprised. It'll be like Christmas morning, and you'll have a bunch of chips.
This is interesting because one of the things that we're looking at is utilizing utility right-of-ways. Right, if you look at any residential property, you have that 8 feet to 16 feet right-of-way that the utilities have for the telephone poles and power poles and all that kind of stuff. And you can't put a tree in there. You can't put a bush in there that's over 8 feet tall or so forth and so on. But you've got plenty of room there all along those almost every alley in residential America. You've got all that room to grow mushroom beds. So we should be putting chip piles and having Stropharia, right? The garden giant, or I really like the shaggy parasol. You know, I don't know if you guys down south there, you get the Chlorophyllum molybdites, but up north here in Montana ways, we get Chlorophyllum rhacodes, which is the same. Looks just like your shaggy parasol, your green parasol down there, but it has white spores, and it's a delicious edible. Sorry about that, but it's one that we regularly cultivate in the garden and in the boulevard spaces here.
Who put these wavy caps in the wood chips?
Yes, these rascals. Yeah, well, that's the story of Seattle. I go up to Olympia every year for the marvelous mushroom fruiting seasons up there. Yeah.
Oh, I'm seeing all these pictures on my feed right about now. It's just prime harvesting right now.
Hey guys.
If you love the show and want to continue getting tantalizing mushroom content such as this, please consider supporting us by going to mushroomrevival.com and purchasing one of our amazing mushroom products.
This is how we keep the lights on. This is a total passion project. We do not offer any outside advertisers, and this has totally revolutionized our health. We want to spread the mushrooms far and wide in every corner possible. If you're listening to this, we will offer you a special coupon code that we're not offering anybody else. If you're listening to this, this is a little Easter egg that you just found. The coupon code is called
PODTREAT, PODTREAT, all caps, no
and
spaces.
To figure out how much you actually save, you got to figure it out. You got to open that Easter egg as well and put it into your cart to find out a special offering that only you will get. We love these products. They help revolutionize our health, and we want to share that health and abundance with you guys who equally love mushrooms as much as we do. So when you go watch a movie, you get a bowl of popcorn, obviously. So when you listen to mushroom podcasts, you get a mushroom tincture pumping through your veins, pumping through your eardrums. You are a mushroom. Help the Mushroom Revival. We love you guys so much. Back to the show.
Yeah, I wanted to revisit Know Your Mushrooms. So I believe since you've started going to Telluride, you've had a near perfect attendance. So you've really watched the evolution of the attendance of the masses as a whole. And what have you noticed? Can you clearly see that there's a mushroom revolution upon us? What would you say about kind of the culture and the volume of people that go to Telluride?
Well, you know, I used to get, I would say that in the 20th century anyway, a lot of the people who showed up for my classes had the kind of last man on earth mentality, right? The lone surviving human type of romantic thought was in a lot of people's head, and they wanted to be able to find mushrooms because they didn't expect that they would be able to find another living thing, and they needed to eat somehow. And as eclectic and far-fetched as that seems, it also kind of represented a distance from any sort of social disaster, that it kept it almost imaginary. And I think within the last 10 or 15 years, I've seen a real dramatic shift in not this, I'm waiting for the apocalypse, I want to be ready for the apocalypse attitude, but okay, the problem is already here. We already need to act, and a lot more people are concerned with how do we remediate, how do we, what have we been missing, basically, rather than some sort of rugged individual attitude. It's more of a collective responsibility type feeling, if that's not too thematic and deep.
I agree, and I actually think that's great. In some ways it's not, because some people who are pessimistic might think it's too late. But I think it puts the fire under people's butts of we are seeing the effects of climate change and all these catastrophic events on many different levels of our society and ecosystems. And now is the time to act. And it's not some faraway event anymore. It's right now. And it's not, in 40 years, then
right.
it'll matter.
I'm not planning for the future. I'm planning for tomorrow. Yeah.
Right.
Or my friend Vicky
Watson, or 40 years ago.
Yeah. We missed it by a generation, but we're still working at it. My friend Vicky Watson once put it, I think, very well. She said, I'm not a pessimist because pessimists think it's too late to do anything. And I'm not an optimist because optimists think nothing really needs to be done. I'm an activist.
That's great.
Yeah, I think that puts it together pretty well. Before we move away from Bolivia, I wanted to make this one point here. I put this on the screen. The blood red polyporn. I think this is one of the more exciting stories that has come up in my Bolivia studies. And this was back about 10 years now, I guess. I encountered these mushrooms. I was pretty familiar with the Pycnoporus already. It's now in the Trametes, and as you know, turkey tails, Trametes, Pycnoporus, all in the same group. A pretty interesting batch of medicinal type mushrooms. They've got some fancy biochemistry going on there.
It's a beautiful mushroom.
And quite unique, quite outstanding too. Mm-hmm.
Actually, they found this mushroom in Ecuador in the Sucumbíos region. The Amazon Micro Renewal Project, or Co-Renewal now, found this mushroom growing out of a log half soaked in an oil pit. And so potentially has a lot of good enzymes for breaking down a lot of the petroleum hydrocarbons, and potentially a good candidate for microremediation as well.
I agree. And I think all your Trametes tend to be pretty effective in that regard. When I was working down there in the Sucumbíos region on that, we cataloged over 100 species of fungi that had peroxidase enzyme capacities, including Xylaria, which was kind of remarkable.
Wow.
Yeah, Xylarias have a unique type of enzyme that breaks down hydrocarbons. And then you have three different kinds of types of peroxidase enzyme. The peroxidase, manganese-dependent peroxidase, and lacase enzymes. And the lacase enzymes are the ones that tend to be made by the Xylaria group. And the others tend to be like your lentinus and pleurotus, which actually turn out to be fairly closely related, believe it or not. So
I would not have guessed.
Weird stuff.
So can you tell us about Know Your Mushrooms? If anyone has never seen this documentary, it's on Netflix, right?
Yep.
Beautiful. Love it. And so can you give us a brief synopsis of the documentary?
Ron Mann just kind of sits on our shoulder as we walk around different places, and he kind of visits me in Bolivia for a few minutes, and then goes into the Telluride Mushroom Festival. And it all has a little bit of a psychedelic type of feel to it. Lots of flashbacks and cartoon characters and music by the Psychedelic Lips, or excuse me, the Flaming Lips. And it's all quite an interesting romp for me. I guess it wasn't as I was surprised at how well Ron was able to make the leap from myco geek to subculture to bring that. That's kind of what Ron Mann has done in all of his films. He took with Go Further, he took Woody Harrelson and the environmental, the more radical Earth First types branch of environmentalism, and took a look at that. And that's in fact how I first met Ron, was through friends of mine in the environmental movement. And then when we met up again in Telluride, that's when I realized, or he explained to me, that he was doing a project on the subculture of mushrooming. So,
and we were actually hanging out in Telluride a few months ago, and it was dry.
Yeah, it was dry in more than one way. This was the COVID version. So I think less than 50 people total at our social
I wouldn't even say
walkways.
50. Somebody
you found a truffle.
You gave me you made me embody a squirrel, and it was a good tip. You're like, think like a squirrel, look for the squirrels, hear the squirrels, be a squirrel.
And the smell, you recommended smelling the soil and that really funky cheese smell.
Mm-hmm.
I smelled it so many times, and I was digging for out like.
If you're listening to the audio, we'll throw up a video of that truffle that I found. It was a cool one, really shimmery, apparently pretty rare. And
it's called Leukogaster. See how it glistens like that?
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Am I smelling that?
Leukogaster is the name that we give it now. And it's really interesting because it had a very mild smell when you gave it to me, but as it aged, it got a little growth on it from a black type of fungus, and the smell exploded.
Whoa.
It went from being kind of, a little bit of a smell to like, whoa, open it on the other side of the room, and it smells like somebody just dropped a whole case of mandarin oranges. I mean, it was fruity. It was like who broke the bottle of champagne? It was very
cool.
And it was a reaction of the fungus with this mold that infected it. And I saw this black mold, so I thought, we got to check this out. So I took that up, put it on the scope, and lo and behold, it's Aspergillus, good old A. Niger. And
interesting. And
as soon as it ran into kind of like our trichoderma analogy, as soon as this truffle got exposed to Aspergillus niger, its fragrance went through the roof.
Do you think that was a competitive kind of enzymatic attack of kind of making more terpenes, so to speak, or was it just kind of a chemical reaction?
Yeah. In fact, you see the same thing with yeast. Yeast will grow and never make a single compound, but if you put a fly leg on a yeast, it will immediately produce aromatic compounds of all sorts, even if that's a dead fly leg that's held by a researcher with tweezers.
Oh.
But if it's only a sterile researcher, or excuse me, if it's only a human finger, or if it's only a tweezer, it will not start making those aromatic compounds. But put that fly leg onto there, and immediately your yeast start making aromatic compounds. So yeah, this synergy between aromatic compounds and insects and fungi is well established and poorly understood.
Interesting. I really want to smell that now, because when we had it, luckily, you had these little glass vials, which we'll show in the video. but with a little cork on top. Those are great for little specimens and like little cordyceps and things like that. Not great for big mushrooms or big specimens, but the little guys, perfect. Yeah, it was a little waxy. It was kind of like petroleum a little bit. It just,
They describe it as a petroleum, or a Vaseline type of smell. Totally. Not really great when you first experience it. But again, truffles are all about ripening. I think that video that I sent you guys shows the gouty area and the rhizopogon. And as the spores are exposed to oxygen, they mature and change, just like butter goes rancid over time. The oils and proteins in the truffle, when they're exposed to air, they change and they become dramatically volatile and aromatic.
And we used some field guides in Telluride that you contributed to. I would wager that you have one of the more extensive knowledges of Rocky Mountain ecosystems.
Here's the latest contribution anyway. With my buddy John Sir Jesse, we went and put together this hiker's guide to the mushrooms.
That is a huge bolete. Is that a real one? I thought that was photoshopped in there.
It looks photoshopped.
No, it's all photoshopped because the amanitas are put on there too. You just had to put it on the background because the real photo, it didn't look nearly as good.
Yeah, that is a very bulbous bolete, and that's saying a lot for a bolete.
Yeah, and that's what so this is the kind of stuff we basically tried to take the 50 or 60 most common species and show people how to tell an amanita button, for example, from a puffball, and just to kind of give everybody a basic so nobody makes newbie mistakes, that kind of stuff. And, we got it out at the last Telluride Mushroom Fest. We'll do it again next year, I'm sure. So
I expect all the listeners of this podcast to be at Telluride next year. Amazing festival. I mean, it is gorgeous in the mountains. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's a big family mushroom fungal reunion, and just being out in the mountains at that high altitude, it's stunning. I mean, even if you don't find mushrooms, we had a great time just be out in the mountains and to look at the views and be out in nature, the fresh air, and just to hang out with cool mushroom people. And that's surprising. Even if you don't find mushrooms, it's still a good time.
I think we found your truffle, Foliota, and maybe one other like Amanita, like a death cap or something. And that was pretty much it.
It's only a handful. Yeah.
But appropriately.
It's worth
please sing. Please sing the Foliota.
You've got to break into song with a good old Foliota. It's like this is one of the most disturbing mushrooms because it's either really good or it's really bad. And I think a large number of our poisoning calls come from somebody who thought, man, this has got to be good. So wrong. So wrong. Yeah, it's like, so I went out a-walking with my faithful dog, saw a big yellow Foliota growing on a log, and I said, fee-fi Foliota, free food, hey, what a deal. Fee-fi Foliota, reckon it'll make a good meal. Some Foliotas are big ones. Other ones are small. Some Foliotas are good to eat. And some are not at all. I woke up in the morning. I was feeling bad. I went to the toilet and I gave it all I had. I said, fee-fi Foliota, never gonna eat it again. Fee-fi Foliota, never gonna eat it again.
I love that song.
Yeah, me too. I'm glad we have a recording now because we've tried to recreate it and it's like, I forgot 50% of the lyrics, but we have a reference.
Actually, I think you're one of the funniest mycologists that I've ever met, and one of the greatest pictures of you of all time is you butt naked in a bathtub full of morels.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Great. I think it was on the cover of a magazine, right?
It was. I have to tell you though, that was staged.
It wasn't real?
I don't always bathe with morels.
That's not a morning ritual for you? Oh man, the truth comes out.
Shattered another legend down in flames. Oh well.
What I can't remember how many Tellurides ago it was, but it was an after party, and I can't remember if it was a house you were renting, but it was pretty far off from Telluride. I think it was an hour drive away or something.
John's place.
And oh yeah, and I was with Rascal Tuberville at the time. We're doing a road trip, and we were about to pull away, and he goes, "Oh wait, I got to get some morels." And he goes out, and I'm like, "Okay, you're gonna get some morels." He comes back with like a 5-gallon bag just full of dried morels that he got from me. It's just huge. I've never seen that many morels in one place. It was okay. We're ready to go.
Like, and
at that point, I'm like, wow, Larry is the morel
where
king.
Were they? Where did they have those morels?
Is that why you can't bathe with it anymore? Rascal took your stash?
No, I've got, I still have plenty, but, it's really hard to sell the morels that have been in the tub with me.
Oh, I bet those are fragrant at this point. They
become collector's items. Yeah.
There's some chemical reaction that happens, and it's just like a whole.
Larry
who dropped
Evans
the champagne? Do you have any tips? I know morels are like the mushroom that a lot of foragers are looking for. It's really prized. They taste amazing. They look really cool. Do you have any tips?
You've got the fire morels clip there, and I think that's a good, quick way to look at the concept of hunting fire morels. I've been doing this pretty much every spring for 30 years. I'm out in the burn. I usually run a crew of people. Everybody, there's nothing more ridiculous than saying that a mushroom picker works for you. It's like herding cats. I managed to buy a few morels from a few individuals now and then, but it's an interesting game. We range all over the U.S. and Canada. Been up to Alaska, and I've also been working with Todd Osmondson, who's with Tom Volk up in La Crosse. And Todd and I have been collecting a database of morels from different burn sites around the country and around the world. We have natural morels from places as far away as Argentina and Russia and China. And then we have probably well over 100 different burn site locations over the last 30 years. When every time I go to a fire, I get a few mushrooms for science, and then I get mushrooms to eat, and so forth and so on. And so I've been able to make a pretty extensive collections of fire morels over different locations and seasons. So we're working on it. The identity of what we call a morel is still doesn't have a real distinct edge. We're still looking at trying to understand whether we're looking at individuals or populations. Are we looking at a population of morels, or are we looking at individual morels? And so far we haven't had really good, we can't really predict that.
How many years is it the next season after a fire that morels pop up, or is it 2 years later, or, you know, when should people look for morels
Evidence
post-fire?
seems to suggest that there are multiple species or maybe multiple individuals of morels that show up after a fire, and that the morels that show up longer than 1 year after a fire are not the same genetic individuals as those that fruit the season after, the immediate season after the fire.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it becomes difficult to talk about because I have to really pick my words, and you can't really make a lot of generalizations. But we're seeing different populations of morels not displayed over a broad geographic area, more like we see isolated populations in a mosaic pattern. Think more like a checkerboard over 100 acres, and then that same expanded pattern over 1,000 acres and over 1,000,000 acres, as opposed to like where you have one side of the divide is ponderosa pine and one side of the divide is Douglas fir. Okay, so you have a very different sort of population distribution. And so again, are we looking at populations of populations, or are we looking at populations of individuals? And that's kind of a weird thing to think about, but we don't know how much diversity an individual can display. Are we looking at the diversity of an entire population, or are we simply looking at one really rowdy mushroom?
Right.
So there's a toxin in morel that a lot of people suggest you have to cook out, and it's volatile, so you can cook it out and it just evaporates out. And if you eat it raw or don't cook it enough, or stand over it while it's cooking and huff the fumes, you'll get sick. And then there's certain individuals, it's rare that even if you cook it really, really, really well, you'll still get a little stomach ache, and specifically for morels. And like there's specific mushrooms that just don't work well for some people. I'm one of those people that morels, unfortunately, every single time that I have them, even just a small amount, and I've tried to cook the shit out of them, I get upset stomach, and it sucks. So I give it away to other people. They're still really fun to find, and morels are really interesting for me. I always find them when I give up.
Guy, you're the great guy. We'll let you keep our stash, man.
Yeah, if I'm morel hunting with you, you can have my stash.
You got a talent there, dude. It's like, it's interesting because you mentioned two things. One is the monomethylhydrazine, MMH, that we see in false morels. And this is like a rocket fuel, and it is very volatile. And so whenever people insist on eating false morels, I would recommend that you first saute them in a fry pan a fry pan with water covering the bottom. And because the MMH is volatile and is driven off at the temperature around boiling water. And so you can eliminate this toxic monomethylhydrazine by doing this parboiling type of process. Morels and other ascomycetes and other mushrooms in general also contain trehalose sugar. Okay, and trehalose sugar is a kind of sugar that is not digestible by humans, by mammals, but it is digestible by bacteria in your gut. And so when people eat a raw morel, this is often one of the most painful and dramatic cases of morel poisoning is this Trehalose sugar reaction. When somebody eats a raw morel, I had a guy come and do this at my farmer's market booth one time, just to be a...
You always have those people.
Yeah. Some guy comes up and goes, "Oh, these are morel. This is expensive, huh?" And I go, and I just look at him and go, "I want you to think of me in about 4 hours."
Wow.
Whenever I did farmers markets, you always get those people that just pick a mushroom out of your container and just eat it raw, and you're like, yeah. And they'll eat them like
peanuts,
like
homie.
potato chips, you know, and you're like, no, that's not it.
Is that the first mushroom you ate, or is that just the last mushroom you ate?
No, I tried it many seasons, and I always have the same reaction, unfortunately. Just with morels, no other mushroom do I have.
So is that the trehalose not being completely cooked down, and then maybe you don't have the gut microbiome to digest it? Would that be a hypothesis here?
Because it is very painful. I have had trehalose related poisoning, and it's like a carbonation on your mucous membranes. It's exactly what happens. If you've ever had Coca-Cola up the nose or something else, you know, anytime you know that carbonation on a mucous membrane is not a happy thing. And that's what's happening with your trehalose sugars. They're being broken down directly into carbon dioxide. And so you're getting micro what would you say, microcarbonation in your intestine. And
ouch.
Yes. Upside down yoga help, you know, inverting your bowels helps disturbingly.
Have you ever prepared a Amanita muscaria or other like mushrooms that you have to prepare in a special way before you can eat it?
We do amanitas every year for a while there. I tell you, right, we did it every year, but we haven't done it.
You gave me a one unprepared. You just said take a bite.
Yeah, well, it's I don't think that the ones in the South are quite as dramatic as the ones you see in Russia in terms of the psychoactive properties. But small amounts of Amanita muscaria are usually unpleasant enough that people don't come back for more. You know.
But if you cook them, aren't they delicious and non-psychoactive?
They're like trout. It tastes like fish. Yeah, we like I say, we did this quite commonly in the past, and I think the novelty wore off. I guess, you know. We still do it occasionally up at Sycamoose, at the Canadian.
It's still on my bucket list. I have yet to eat an Amanita.
Huh?
Really?
It's a good, you know, it's a very tasty mushroom. And seriously, the stuff around Colorado, we would just slice it and boil it, you know, boil it in water for 2-3 minutes and throw the water out and you'd be fine. When I'm dealing with stuff from Alaska or in the Russian Far East, when we were there, oh boy, the water would turn red like lipstick. And
whoa, crazy.
Yeah, it was. So it's different. It's different. There's a lot of different strains. In fact, one of the pictures that I sent you, we're talking about boletes and amanitas, and you do see this synergy, right? You often see the amanita and the bolete showing up together. You see a similar type of synergy with swillus, right? So your swillus and your gomphidius, because gomphidius kind of parasitizes the swillus mycelia. And that there's rumors that there's a synergy between boletes and amanitas as well. I think that this, you know, we see boletes and amanitas, or amanita in the muscaria group, growing together in all these different ecosystems. I saw it in Russia. I saw it in Alaska. I see it in Canada. I see it in Montana. And it's not the same species of bolete or the same species of Amanita muscaria. They seem to have their local variation of this relationship that has kind of maybe evolved in place from some initial point of contact or whatever. But it's pretty interesting to see that you see, even though it's not an Amanita muscaria in the strict sense of the word, or a Boletus edulus in the strict sense. For example, we see Boletus granedulus, and one of the local Amanitas, we see Boletus, what you guys have, rubriceps, with your own local variety of Amanita muscaria down there. We see a similar type of thing up in Canada. And it's just, this type of variability is something that I've been fortunate enough to be able to observe up and down the hemisphere. And we've actually found some of the same mushrooms in Kansas that you found in Ecuador, and some of the same stuff all the way from Bolivia up to British Columbia. So it's interesting to see how certain groups and species of mushrooms seem to be more generalists and more able to adapt to a wide variety of temperatures and conditions, whereas others are really highly specific and they never leave a small localized area.
We actually have an interesting mushroom here in Texas called, the common name is the devil's cigar fungus, and it looks like someone just smushed out a cigar. I don't know if it's true, but I heard that it only shows up in Texas and Japan. And that's it. I don't know if you've seen it anywhere else, but it's just another instance where I don't know what it is.
I think you'll see it all the way up into Missouri.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But yes, it is unusual that Japan is the only other place. You don't see it in other parts of Asia. And I have never collected it in Japan. But it's what I'm trying to think of other similar species that we see, like your Spathularia. We see Spathularia that shows up in New England and all the way down into Bolivia. We see puffballs in Argentina that we find in British Columbia. So yeah, there's some pretty interesting, population genetic studies, I think, that are waiting to be done. I think that we've got a lot of what we call cryptic species, things that look like the same thing, but are actually very different types of species. I like to make the joke that people go, well, what's all this nonsense? Oh my God, my head hurts. I have to change the Latin name so many times on my mushrooms. I change my Latin names more often than I change my underwear. Don't quote me on that. But I think the important thing is, I said, a name is a handle, right? And when we basically borrowed the European names 100 years ago, because we didn't have any names for our mushrooms, So we just borrowed the Europeans' name, and they want them back. Come on, dude. We didn't say you could have them. You just borrowed the names, right? And it's kind of a joke, but really the new genetic ability DNA analysis has allowed us to see that a lot of the things that were morphologically similar are actually genetically miles and miles apart, and likewise things that we would never have suspected were genetic identity are exactly the same manifestation of the same organism going through a different sexual morph, as I mentioned earlier, or something like this, We're debating right now, how does the morel spend its life?
Right.
We see the morel after a fire. We see the morel in the spring, but where is it after that? I mean, what's it doing for the other 11 months and 2 weeks of the year, you know?
Yeah, and I'm super excited for, you know, more DNA work to classify all these different types of fungi to really see what's going on, and then new tools like Merlin Sheldrick is a great soil scientist with soil mycorrhizal fungi. More tools to actually get in there and see what's happening below the surface. I've been seeing a lot of videos lately of people hooking up these audio sensors. I don't really know what they are, to different species of mushrooms.
Oh yeah.
And they elicit different sound waves and different songs. And, you know, you can see also a lot of indigenous groups in ingesting a plant or a mushroom, having a song related to each mushroom or things like that. You yourself are a musician and have many songs related to mushrooms. Was this inspired after the mushroom, or is this something that you do while you're looking for mushrooms as like a mushroom hunting song, or what inspired you to make music about mushrooms?
Oh, well, where I live in a strange and isolated place in my mind, and occasionally I manage to rhyme my way out. It's I would say that you know, songsmithing is kind of an incidental thing. When I'm teaching, I often have to turn over the same material several times, or try to put a new spin on material to try and make it understandable. I certainly made a different lecture to people when we were emailing than I did when we were Facebooking, than I did when we were Instagramming. And so each audience or each medium changes the way that you present your message there, you know. So yeah, I think you know, musically, because I'm repeating things in different ways, I get certain turns of phrase that turn up again and again, you know, like I'm selling marasmius, fairy ring marasmius, the one in the marketplace. I'm selling fairy ring marasmius. It's like, where does it grow? And I go, well, it's growing in the pasture now, where his neighbors likely are the horsey and the cow. You know, or then it's like, well, what do you do with it? Well, it's like, let's see, it's fine with a little chicken sauce, or maybe on your buttered toast. And so these kind of phrases chase their way into it. And one woman comes up to me and says, well, these are very nice mushrooms, but they grow on a lawn. And are you really sure no doggy wee-weed on it? And it's priceless. You can't make that shit up, dude. I mean, you know.
You can learn a lot at a farmer's market about what people really think about mushrooms.
It's a great social study.
It is. And how many people will go out of their way to tell you that they don't like mushrooms? Mm-hmm. They don't do that for like peppers or anything else. They don't go to
I hate garlic.
Let me tell you, I was on the other side of the farmer's market, but I had to walk all the way over here to tell you that garlic.
It's the devil's food. Oh well, you know, it's a means of expression, and I think that's, you know, this is why it's exciting to me to see the decriminalization of psilocybin in Oregon and other places now moving forward. As you know, I did some research and some work in Jamaica down there with psychedelic therapy and examining doses for potential commercialization of psilocybin. If you're going to be having recreational psilocybin, we did something called the beta test, where we basically put people on a 7-mile beach in Jamaica, which is, I think, probably most people would call that a fairly party situation. And then we gave them unlimited access to psilocybin tea in varying doses to find out what people's physiological responses and tolerance would become. And we had some very exuberant and fascinating volunteers who helped us with this subject. And it was interesting to see that we really had a very different response to psilocybin when it was in the gram or less dosage versus when we got to a critical dose of about 2 grams. Once we got to the 2 gram or thereabouts level, we got to the big laugh. And that was the thing that you see characterized in other psychedelic studies, is you get this laugh period, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, where everything is absolutely hysterical. And this seems to have that purgative effect, that a reset that people talk about for a psychological healing, PTSD, and various sorts of, traumatic experiences where people have literally, they've lost their laugh, and that this psilocybin therapy has presented a number of people with a way to regain that physiological balance. We're kind of like separating out the psychological and the physiological components of depression, and the mushroom pretty much erases the physiological component of depression and allows you to meditate, if you will, on the psychological reasons for your bad attitude, if you will. So it's kind of
What a better place to do it on a beach in Jamaica. It's beautiful.
Everybody's going to hustle you, dude. Everybody's, every 10 feet along the way, somebody's going, hey, come buy some weed. Hey, come over here. Come buy over here,
Were you in Montego Bay?
No, we were in, this was in Negril.
Oh, got it.
Negril, all the way west. Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of tourist hot spots where, they'll pester you like crazy because you're white and you have money, and sure, it's a quick buck, and it's a party. Sure, it's a party scene. Yeah. I was hanging out in Morant Bay, which was a little more low key, and so didn't get a lot of that. I think that's where Chad Cotter was originally setting up the location, but he moved and had a great time. And it's so important on a global scale because of COVID, and it's everyone's indoors, isolated from their family, their friends. Everyone has to communicate via a screen. I mean, it's hard. I mean, and then their business is failing, or they just got laid off their job or whatever it is. I mean, I'm really curious to see the statistics of mental illness just skyrocket during 2020. Even myself, I've noticed I've gotten a little more, like, damn, like it's a little more gray this year. And I feel like I live a great, I feel like everyone could have a fat dose of mushrooms and get their laugh back. Post 2020, I think it's needed for a lot of people, not for everyone, but for most people on the planet. I think mushrooms are such a good ally, and I think could be a huge, huge benefit for humans and beyond.
Yeah. That said, I think that, probably one of the biggest benefits in a global picture, if you will, in the big scene. I would say probably the most critical function for fungi is protein, as a protein source, because worldwide that is definitely one of our limiting factors, and the ability to produce protein, whether it's for animal feed or for human feed or for any one of the other types of processes that we can use it. I think this is a very key role that fungi have really, it's all been the monopoly of the guys with 50,000 gallon steel tanks. It's all been pretty much a corporate scale process at this point. And I think that the retail application of mushrooms, whether it's for food or medicine or just simply, water filtration even, I think that the application of mushrooms on a more retail scale is a tremendous opportunity that we have coming up here. I worked down in Ecuador for several years on trying to remediate the petroleum issues down there and mitigate that. And seriously, Donald Moncayo and his independent groups probably accomplished more than all the other, foundation funded and petroleum negotiated projects down there. And it's simply because he was able to apply an appropriate scale to the problem. And I think that right now, we're faced with a very big problem. We look at every municipality in the United States right now is looking at a looming problem with human biosolids. We're also looking at a lot of our carbon waste is being oxidized. We have still, stupid as it is, we're piling up hundreds and hundreds of years old trees into huge piles, and we're putting a match at the bottom of it, and we're turning it into white ash, CO2, and water. Tons. This is literally tons of carbon that has been sequestered or fixed over millennia in many cases, and at the top of a watershed, no less, in Colorado or Montana or someplace where it's hard to get carbon to the top of the watershed. And then this is being burned off. We're losing all the water retention ability, all the nutrient exchange capacity that this wood, this biochar, this brown cuboidal rot, these are the natural components of our northern soils. The ones that you just mentioned earlier are our prime sequestration of carbon. These are prime carbon sinks in the whole world. We don't have a better carbon sink than we do here in North America, and you can go out into the forest just about anywhere in the Columbia Basin and walk through an old growth stand and see how many feet of organic matter we have lost since the Europeans showed up. I mean, you can literally see the marks on the stumps and the other stuff, how high up the soil used to be versus where it is now.
And this brings it full circle of what we were talking about in the beginning of what you've seen, the change of Telluride of kind of the global consciousness of, let's prepare for 40 years down the line of something going to happen, to now it's happening and we need to band together and think big. This isn't a small problem anymore that we can fix by all, riding a bike one day a week instead of riding our car. You know, this is a huge issue on many different fronts.
I see the switch as denial. You know, for so long we dealt with our fossil fuel addiction problem the same way that a junkie deals with an addiction problem. You know, it's like we simply denied it happened. You know, we don't really have an automobile problem. Look, everybody else is doing it, you know, and we've come to the point now where we don't have that. Denial isn't working anymore. And we tried denial on this COVID thing. That didn't work very good. You know, it doesn't seem to be a very effective strategy. So, you know, this cultural habit that we have about denial as an acceptable approach to a problem, hopefully we're getting away from that. Hopefully we're learning.
Do you have any advice for aspiring mycologists wanting to get into the field, or maybe they are already in the field and want to have a greater impact for the world?
Get on your mark, get set, go. No, seriously, it's awesome. I'm just delighted. I look at the number of species of mushrooms that have commercial application from, you know, I mean, just pick any mushroom in any one of the fungal boogie songs. Every single one of them has an economic potential that has not even been close to realized in this country. Years ago, 2016 maybe, there was an economic study that described the role of mushrooms in the American economy. And they looked at the amount of consumption that Americans had of mushrooms, and the ballpark number they put out, I believe, was $67 billion worth of economics were not being utilized because Americans had no savvy about mushrooms. If we basically bought as many mushrooms as Europeans bought, there'd be a $67 billion bump in our economy. And I mean, you know,
we're getting there.
It's all hypothetical stuff, you know, but you see what I'm getting at. You know, we could be directing a lot more of our resources in this direction rather than towards fast food or something else, you know. And I think that you can also see, you know, think of it. We didn't even, in 2013, 2014, your personal information wasn't worth the paper you could print it on. But by 2017, that was part of a multi-billion-dollar industry in selling your personal information. So we were able to monetize a huge chunk of our human fiction in just 3 years by doing that. Think of what we can do if we can monetize carbon sequestration, if we can monetize soil building, if we can monetize, you know, this type of trophic stacking, this type of utilization of organic material all the way down.
It starts with us and policymakers.
I never would have thought I would see the day where, you know, these big fast food chains are offering plant-based alternatives.
Yeah.
You know, like McDonald's and Burger King and Dunkin' Donuts and all these, KFC, all these places offering, you know, a plant or a meatless version. It's not perfect yet, but I think we're getting somewhere.
Sign me up for the soldier fly burger.
Oh yeah. Half soldier fly, half shiitake mushroom or morels.
There you go. Got to get a little mushroom in there for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed silkworm larva. They sold those on.
Oh, interesting.
On the street. Well, you know, they make the silkworms. To get the silk off of them, they put them in warm water, right, to make them do their thing. they're left with all these little bugs. And the poorest of the poor guys go out and take these out on the street. And there's such a low quality food, although they're really tasty and buttery and delicious, but they have a status problem, you know, in Korea. Mm-hmm. So the guys go out there and they give you a little dart and they spin a little wheel and you throw the dart on the wheel and whatever it sticks on, that's how much you pay them. And so there's a chance you won't pay him anything, and there's a chance you might pay him $5 for that lousy cone. But you know, usually
that's fun.
Order 50 cents or something.
Yeah, or you know, Thailand and China, they'll inject them with Cordyceps militaris mycelium, and they'll grow Cordyceps militaris out of them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
wasn't there a silk farm like right down the road from Mushroom Revival and?
They're
Massachusetts.
In South Deerfield, where we made our Cordyceps farm. There was a really old silk factory, and that was like, it was booming. And we found a ton of Cordyceps militaris around there, just like a few minutes down the road. Who knows?
Yeah.
So we have one final question that we ask all of our guests on our show, and I'll change the wording of it just for you. If fungi had the microphone and could say one thing to the whole human race, what would they say?
I don't have a mouth. Actually,
they speak in smells.
All seriousness aside, this is a really interesting time to take a minute and think about the nature of perception, and think about the fact that as monkeys that are totally obsessed with our visual input, we receive a very different picture of the world than something like a grizzly bear, for example, which a dog has 300 times as much olfactory sensors as we do. A grizzly bear has 3,000 times.
Wow. Okay,
so a grizzly bear is not he's not living in the same world that you and I are. He's living in a world of aromas, and his world is about 5 miles at the outside, and it's a bullseye that moves in as he can pick up different scents. A fungus doesn't have a mouth, it doesn't have an ear, it doesn't have an eye, it doesn't have any sort of visual recognition. That's why the fungus doesn't give a shit what its mushroom looks like. Who cares? You know, well, who's looking at it? You know, the mushroom gets all its information from right here. It gets it all from your biosensors, from your what we call smell and taste. But all the mushroom gets is biochemical receptors and electromagnetic sensors. We know they can. How do we know that something can perceive something? You know, if it displays a color, we think, well, probably that insect, if it displays a red, it can probably perceive a red, you know? And well, a fungus, it can obviously perceive the radiation in Chernobyl. It's able to take that energy and turn it into itself. It's able to turn it into organic material. So it must be able to perceive that, if you will, in that regard. And so, you know, this is our challenge here, is to see how does a thing like a fungus perceive, or how do organisms operate in the universe of their own perception? How does the perception of a sow bug or an earthworm differ from that of a predator beetle or a bird, for example? You know, when you start to imagine the perceptual filters or the perceptual feed that an organism gets, then you start to realize the factors that it can, if it can't perceive it, it can't chase it. So we reverse engineer that. We find out what something can perceive. by what it seems to be influenced by.
And will we ever know?
Sure.
If you take enough mushrooms.
A little more
Just taking
tomorrow.
up mushrooms.
A little more tomorrow. A little more the next day. A little more on the
Yeah.
way. You got a ways to go though. We're not done.
Mm-hmm. I saw this beautiful infographic years ago, and I've tried to find it again. But basically, it took like a dog, a human, and a few other organisms and gave sort of an aura of their perception. So it showed that humans can see up to this length away from them. They can hear this far. They can smell this far. And each sense was different colors. You could really get the scope of like the volume of perception that particular organism was capable of perceiving. And just comparing that from human to dog was stark, extremely stark. And we are mammals. There's actually a lot in common that we have with canines. So I cannot even imagine trying to create that for something like a fungus. I don't even think we would have the proper senses to add to that graph.
Right.
But
The sense of scale, right? Because I mean, imagine that you're moving forever through an impossibly dense and, infinite medium. And the only thing is that there's a little bit different flavor in one direction than the other direction. When you start to look at that, you realize what a fantastically rich information source electromagnetics must be providing for these organisms too, that we not very well equipped for.
Maybe when we become cyborgs, we can upgrade to different senses. I'm gonna buy the electromagnetism pack.
yeah, you see who has the strongest Wi-Fi. Just take a stroll.
So where can people follow your work?
Problem. As soon as I get next to electromagnetic devices, they short out, they fuck up. I mean, all I do is stand close to the thing where you put your card in. If I step back and the guy goes, "Why'd you step back?" I guess, "You want me to step forward?" I step forward. The whole thing goes on the fritz. Okay, step back. We'll try it again.
So where can people follow your work? Do you have a website? I know the Know Your Mushrooms documentary. We talked about a few of the books that you contributed to or wrote.
Yeah. You can always write me. I'll put my address here up. It's a post office box 7306 in Missoula, Montana, 59807. And of course, you can always check me out, fungaljungle@gmail or Fungal Jungle on the YouTube. I've got a YouTube channel, so you can go there and check out stuff like that. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and all that kind of stuff, but it's so tiresome to try and document your own life. I need to hire somebody to do that shit. I'm too busy to talk about it.
Well, you can add this podcast to your portfolio.
Thank God.
If you have extra morels, just send him over to Larry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
We got you there for sure.
That was a great episode. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in and shrooming in with us to another episode of the Mushroom Revival podcast. We couldn't do it without you. So thank you, all of our listeners. Wherever you're tuning in from all over the globe, we have listeners all over the map. So we're super, super, super grateful for you. If you're just listening to audio say you're on Apple iTunes, please leave a review and subscribe. We have actually the number one highest rated mushroom podcast out there on Apple iTunes and other platforms. So if you're also on there, head over to YouTube because we have a whole video component to this episode and other future and past episodes. So check that out. If you're on YouTube, hello, click that subscribe button, leave a comment, a review. We'd love to hear from you, positive or negative. We just want to hear what your thoughts are. And if you have any requests for future topics that we can jive out about or guests that you want us to bring on our show, please reach out. And go to mushroomrevival.com. We have a whole line of functional mushroom products and more coming soon. A lot of blog posts you can read into and
all the rest of our podcasts with transcripts and show notes. Each podcast is a wormhole in and of itself. So we welcome you to jump in and enjoy yourself.
Thanks, y'all. As always, much love, and may the spores be with you.